Welcome and thank you for joining this week's training session on the Future Founders Program 2022 with Open UK. My name is Matt Barker. I am Open UK's entrepreneur in residence. I am a founder of JetStack, which is a Kubernetes company, and we have a number of open source projects that we've developed over the years. Open UK, for those that don't know, is the UK organization for open technology, and we help with UK leadership and international collaboration around open tech. So this is session 7 on community and DevRel in open tech businesses. And what we really want people to come away from this session is why you need a community and how do you develop one. Is a community different to a user base? If so, how is it? And maybe even some community disaster stories and what to avoid in building and running communities. We're also looking for people to join the mentorship program where we're giving one-on-one help to potential founders in the space. Please go to the Open UK website and check out the Founders Forum there. So we have a couple of great panelists today. Unfortunately, we do not have the Alison with us for personal reasons, but I'm very happy to welcome Dominique Top, who is a solutions engineer at HashiCorp. Dominique is, like I said, a solutions engineer at HashiCorp, passionate about music, technology, giving back to the community, prides herself as a keen learner, solver of problems, and a connector of dots and people. Aside from having been playing an active part in the DevOps community in London since 2016, she has done a huge number of community events and initiatives. So I'm going to go through them all. Dominique, Docker community leader for the London chapter, Docker London meetup organization, Cloud Native London co-organizer, Container Camps Super Meetup co-organizer, DevOps Days, DevSecOps Days, co-founder and ambassador of Tech Camp, ambassador for Mentor, MC the first ever HashiCorp Digital EU. I didn't know that. And I've also got your LinkedIn profile here, but I won't share that. Welcome, Dominique. Thanks for coming. Really nice to have you with us. I don't know how you've got time for anything with all those things that you do, but we also have Laura Czajkowski, who's the director and developer community and enablement at Solace. And Laura is an experienced program creator who crafts incentives for developers to engage with projects, organizations, and community members. She's been an open source advocate since the early 2000s, involved in various activities from leading and organizing conferences to software testing and documentation. In her spare time, she's a regular conference speaker who is passionate about getting everyone involved in open source. And as I mentioned when we were prepping for this session, Laura is the first community member that I think I met ever back in 2005 or 6, early days of Canonical, when she was doing work for the Ubuntu community. And we worked together twice, once at Canonical and then once at Mongo, and then for the second time at MongoDB. Welcome, Laura. Thank you very much for joining.
Very much.
So what I'd like to start with is really for both of you, if you could just introduce yourself and talk a little bit about how you got into open technology and into community, because I'm sure a lot of the people that are going to watch this are kind of considering how they might dip a toe in the water and get involved with open source and in the community. Laura, do you want to give us a quick overview of how that worked out for you?
So, as I mentioned, I work for Solace, which is an event streaming and management platform that organizations can use to power the events. The more quickly an enterprise can get information about events to where they need to be, the more effectively a business can react to opportunities. So my job right now is to grow and engage with our developer community across the globe and create those incentives and programs along the way. My journey into open source was kind of like not your average one, but I don't think there actually is an average journey into open source or community. So I got involved through my computer society at college. I ended up turning up to an AGM and becoming the only woman in the room. So I was given the role of the treasurer, and I eventually found like what was actually the benefits of communities is getting involved with people and hearing and sharing those stories. So I actually ran my first conference back in 2007 by inviting guest speakers from all over the world, including the likes of John O'Bacon, Matthew Ravel, and Stuart Langridge, and even many guest speakers from Red Hat and Intel across the way. So that was kind of my first kind of engagement of hearing these stories of people from across the globe, but also they were energizing people so much that people decided to get involved in those projects. And I thought that's really kind of fascinating. People can take part from all skills like documentation, writing, not just coding. And I think that's kind of important, that there's so many different ways to get involved in communities. And from there, I just kind of like became more involved in the Ubuntu community within Ireland, involved in the local teams in the membership community. And I really enjoyed that actually. And I think from there, I got to see and expose myself to different cultures, different ways of working, different ways of communicating. And I learned from that as well, because no two people like to be talked to or engaged the same way. So I've learned how, as a manager then myself, and brought into my professional life, how to work with different people across the spectrums. I think that's quite interesting. And I just love open source because at the end of the day, I get to meet people from different backgrounds, of different, bringing different ideas to different communities. And even conversations like today, and even other events, you know, you take what you learn from listening to people and you bring that back into your organization, into your project or your community. I think that's kind of been the, unfortunately, the downside for the last 2 years. We haven't had that same impact. But I look forward to today's discussions and what I can learn from today and from Dominique.
Thanks, Laura. And Dominic, how did you get into the open source and community?
Well, I think I've had a bit of a. I'm one of those people that have like the long way around, the different way in. I have a background in music, so I'm a singer and a sound engineer, like by my degree. But when I finished school, I was a recruiter for a while, and back in the Netherlands, because that's where I'm from, I was there, you know, doing DevOps recruitment. It was a bit of a thing. I mean, we've had a talk about it. I won't go into it too much because it's interesting, but it's not that interesting. But basically, throughout my career there, I wanted to know everything and anything about DevOps because nobody else was able to tell me in the company. So throughout the course of my tenure, in the first couple of months, like I started to having lots of conversations with lots of engineers about DevOps and you know, started to figure out that that's actually quite interesting. So started going to a bit more meetups, and at some point I decided to move to the UK and London specifically. And in London, the meetup scene is a lot more fun, a lot more large, a lot more intense. So I wanted to learn more about, you know, what kind of technologies were out there, what kind of communities there were. But for me, going to meetups by myself as a fresh off the boat, some people would say, coming, you know, like in a different city, like large city by myself, you know, going into these rooms by myself, the only woman in the room as well, not with the right background, because I felt very like, oh, well, everybody here is smart. Everybody here is an engineer. I don't really deserve to be here, but I'm going to be here anyway because I want to learn things. Just also didn't talk about my job at the time because, you know, like I think everybody can agree that most people don't really like recruiters. And I've found that, you know, if I speak to somebody like, hey, so what do you do? It's like, yeah, I'm a recruiter. It's like, oh, okay. You know, which is weird, annoying, because it's like that blocked me kind of from having the conversations that I wanted to have. Is like, why would you want to use these technologies together, or why are you here? What did you think of the speakers? And I felt like the in-person meetup scene was you know, like was awesome. I can started going to more and more of the same ones, and people started recognizing me. And to some extent, you know, I think you mentioned it, like when I started helping out with Container Camp, that was kind of like the pivotal moment for me when I was like, you know, when people specifically said you were just as much part of our community as everybody else here, so don't feel like you're like an outsider, you're one of us basically. And basically from that moment onwards, it's been catapulted. Like I started organizing the Docker meetup and helping out with a bunch of other meetups in the community, started going to 3-week different ones, you know, like I was everywhere all of the time. You know, so it's and since then I've been trying to help facilitate people being able to learn from each other, and you know, like setting up the events and stuff like that. I think for especially for the community that's normally very much online, I think having a physical presence or some sort of moment where you can socially interact with people that you know have the same interests as you can be helpful.
So it sounds like you both got into it from slightly different angles then. So I guess that should give people confidence that you don't really need to always have an engineering background or, you know, be deep in projects in GitHub to be able to get involved in community, which is important for people to know. But I guess if you're thinking here, like talking to a potential founder in a company that wants to start an open source project, should they be thinking about creating a community on day one? And if they should, like, why should they be thinking about creating a community?
Absolutely.
Tommy, do you want to let us know?
Yeah, I mean, if you're creating stuff for developers or for engineers or for practitioners, you need to understand what they think of your product and how they would want to use it. Like you're providing it's an equal, in my opinion, an equal service that you're providing to other people. Like, you want to know, what are you using? How are you using it? Is there anything else that you would like to see? And if you include, if you wait too long for people to be included in it, like it will, maybe go in a direction that people won't like, or and on the flip side, you will foster a very strong user base, but also community, and people will want to help each other. That's something that I really like about HashiCorp. Like, it's practitioner first. Like, all of our, like, I don't want it to be too much about work, but like, all of our products are available open source. There's a really, really, really strong community as far as I can see, and everybody's super helpful to each other. And I think that has been very fundamental for the success of the business.
So it sounds almost like, in your case, Dominique, or what you've said there, is maybe using or working with a community to almost act like product managers from what you're saying, to help give you feedback on product, is like maybe one of the ways that would be like one of the things that would be beneficial from building another community. Laura, like, would you agree with that? Is there anything else you think that's
I think that's a great example of it, like, because at the end of the day, if you've got developers trying something out new and you get them excited about it, they're also willing to talk about it more. And obviously, like, if you go along to a meetup in the night and you hear a great talk, you're more inclined to talk about the next day at work and kind of introduce it, and then also go research it again. So especially if you have those areas kind of set up, like your documentation, your website, or the GitHub repo, something they can actually follow up afterwards, rather than just saying, potentially this may happen, and potentially it's a great conversation, but if you want the meat and you want people to actually get involved, you want those developers to kind of get hooked into something, having all that little bit of a story around it is a great way to actually hook people into it. But Dominic is completely right, though, because if you've got developers trying something new out, and at that point in time providing you feedback, you're not using them as beta testers. You actually genuinely, this is your potential, your users, your customers down the line. You want them to give you early adoption feedback, because catching that right there, are we on the right track? Is this something that you would use? Is this something that would benefit you? Could you potentially see this replacing something within your organization that would help you do something even better? That's a great way to actually provide that feedback. And obviously, if you talk to one person, they might have one opinion, two people, three, but if you get like more opinions and more feedback, then that also gives you credit and understanding where we are on the right track. That gives you, I think, confidence as a founder, as an organization, setting going, yes, we believe in it, we know we're on the right track. We've also got confirmation of this. I think it also makes an organization feel they are excited as well, and that they're on the right track.
Yeah. Great points. I mean, from talking about, I think we've talked a lot about in-person meetups, and in advance of starting JetStack, I actually did the same thing as you, Dominique, mainly because I was interested in kind of getting involved in the container communities. I think I went to something like 3 meetups a week. I worked out at the end of 2014, that I'd eaten something like 1,500 pieces of pizza, because every single meetup I was eating pizza. And so not only did I get to learn a lot about the community, but I also added a couple of inches on the waistline. But obviously, I was quite lucky in London, because there are so many meetups and there's such a strong community. There's so many people to meet, and all of those people I was testing out ideas on, and I was talking about what they were doing with containers. And then obviously Kubernetes got announced. Well, like, obviously it wasn't probably that well known. And then I kind of knew just from speaking to key people, that's where I wanted to focus was on Kubernetes. But for people who maybe aren't in London, or somewhere like, somewhere in, wherever it is, northern Norway, for example, like, how do they think about building communities or sort of engaging? Because it's not just about being in person, is it? I mean, where can you look to go if you want to try and create communities or get engaging communities that aren't in person? Laura, do you want to?
Yeah, so I think you're right. We're very spoiled being anywhere near in a major city. That's not just London, that could be Paris, New York, or wherever. In a major city, you tend to have a kind of like a cluster of organizations with people and developers around. But that's not to say that if you're not in those areas, and I think with the world going more remote friendly, we need to see things more online. So conversations like this right now is great, and information for developers and for organizations out there. So I think when you think about looking at what's happening for your next engagement with the developers, or figuring if you need to build a community, potentially like having somewhere online that people can come to you, but not just come to you, but find out why they should be there. Is it a forum? Is it a blog, a tutorial, or portal? Somewhere where they can find all of that information in one place is kind of key. Don't make them go to 5 different sites. Don't make them going here, there, and everywhere. Bring them to you, but also keep them there, and not like capture them, but gather their attention, and also give them a reason to provide you with that feedback again. So again, potentially that's like a private user group, potentially that's a private focus group to, again, going, hey, you know, we'd love to test the pool, and also gives you potentially a wider reach than the ones that are just currently in your location as well. And don't forget, your user base, your community are also going to be something that's more than local to you, they are global. And thinking about that, but also then think about the fact that they potentially aren't speaking the same language as you. So again, think about translations for wider use-based testing. And that's something that you think about, because if you only focus on one language, then you may potentially exclude a wider use base. And I know that's quite hard at the very beginning, because you're like, well, that's a lot more investment to do translations on our website, translations for the blogs, the tutorials, or your white paper use cases. But I would think start slow and start small and focus and expand upon that. And if that's successful, I think that will give you greater adoption and also greater visibility on the program that you're trying to create.
That's some good points there. Dominique, anything to add on that?
Yeah. I was just echoing what Laura said, but like make it, as I said, like make it easy for people to find you. And make it easy for people to stay. You know, like yeah, just don't put the 5 different things in different places. But you know, like it's and I wanted to say incentivize, but I think Laura's got a lot more experience with incentivizing people online in that regard, right? But it's important to, you know, if you're wanting to like engage with people online, like there's loads of different places where you can do that. Like for example, like meetup.com for physical things, like there's very much like a one-stop shop for anything that you want to find if there's something that you have an interest in. But then also you know, there's a whole bunch of other places where you can go, but it's like yeah, it's pretty much, I don't really have anything to add. I just wanted to echo that I agree with what Laura said.
Yeah, and that's I think it's a good point though about sort of looking at hubs where there's already a lot going on. Like meetup.com is a great example of that, and maybe just engaging in like possibly some of the Slack groups, you know, around some of the projects that you might be interested in. I've found like good ways to engage. But talking of like of like community, obviously we're talking about it here in relation to open technology businesses. Do you think that like what are the differences between community in open source or open tech businesses in comparison to maybe proprietary or businesses, or just general communities around, you know, new bands or anything? Like what are the major differences? And do you think that community in the way that we think about it is unique to open source and open source businesses?
I'll give it a go for a start. I think the difference between the open source communities and other communities is that I feel like everybody in the open source communities are very creative in wanting to like solve a solution, like solve a problem in like a solution people haven't thought of before. And some of the people that I've seen speak at the Docker meetup will go like, hey, have you seen this cool thing that I can do with it? So I haven't thought about that yet. And like seeing people come up with like really random things of using that particular product and having chats about it afterwards, like I think that is like the vibrant kind of, you know, like melting pot of ideas. Whereas I think with the more proprietary like get-togethers, you know, like some conferences for you know, like the major cloud vendors or something like that, it just gets more a bit like tell me why I should use your product and why I should use it out of the box for just a particular thing, because not really much creative you can do about it, in my opinion.
I think that's a really interesting way of looking at it. It's almost like a community of creators where you can actually have the freedom to actually create and engage, to actually change like pieces of code or whatever it is and actually contribute to that. I mean, that's a little bit different. Whereas obviously communities, from another perspective, you're just a consumer of it. So you might really like the brand, you might really like the product, and you can say that you can call yourself maybe a sort of a brand loyalist or whatever, but you don't have the opportunity to actually engage in that community and actually start to change that code or contribute to it or work within a team with it, within it. Laura, is there any other markers that you would say are maybe different with open tech communities?
I think especially like with open source in particular, you have people that like just sit on that creative side, but also they feel more empowered to try something out. You're not having to purchase something and pay a trial fee. So actually you have greater adoption this way, because people will feel, okay, I'm not having to buy something, I have to get a license approval, a PO, a requisite, an invoice and payment to try this new software. I can actually download and play it and get au fait with it. And I think more developers try that out first. so that actually, if they're trying the next project, they have a greater opportunity to bring some new initiatives into an organization. They're not locked into vendor lock-in. Not locked into vendor lock-in. And I think that's kind of interesting, right? Because actually that increases your adoption with your user base and your community. And I think the main thing, I think the difference is some of the proprietary communities, and they still do exist, let's be honest. You know, if you look at Microsoft for years and years and years prior to the last couple of years of them being more open and more friendly, were very proprietary if you think about their community, but they still were the MVPs of the world. They're still the Microsoft community. It was its own community, but it was very hard to get involved and very hard to get inside awareness of what was actually happening, but it was a community. So I still do think both do exist, but from if you're looking to set up a new organization, new company, and a new product, being more open and more transparent in the way that you work, but also being more open to new ideas and receptive to the feedback, I think will actually do you a lot better in the long run, to be honest.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Do you actually, again, thinking of a potential founder in the space who's maybe looking to try and start a company in open technology or open source, do you actually already need a project that you've created that's on GitHub to actually start building a community, or can you do it kind of without an open source project? And would you recommend trying to create a community before the project? Like how do you connect the actual projects themselves, like to the creation of a community?
You can absolutely create a community without a project. I mean, I think
you're living your testament to that, Dominique.
Yeah, I mean, for people who don't know, have never seen me before, and for everybody's looking, watching this afterwards, like there's, I think just before the pandemic, there was this whole thing around stuff that I've done, like some of the key things. I mean, Matt, you put it in a very interesting way the other day. How did you put it?
Well, I mean, I think from my perspective, like DevOps Dom just sort of kind of appeared like overnight. It seems like, and before I knew it, I couldn't look anywhere without seeing DevOps Dom all over the place. But yeah, and it was quite fascinating to me, obviously, because you came from like a recruitment background, and like it felt like almost overnight your profile changed from being someone who was a recruiter to sort of someone who was like a key member of the community. And so yeah, clearly I asked the question knowing that you kind of created your own sort of position in the community around you in some ways. And I know it's not connected specifically to a project or a company, but you managed to do it. So like how?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it like I like hanging out with people, and I like learning from other people, and I like surrounding myself with people who can teach me things. And I think the potentially for people who are trying to replicate that in their future businesses, like just getting ideas around you and getting people around you that can be excited about the same things and stuff like that. Like, hey, would you be willing to help me if I do these things? Like, would you, could you tell me a bit more about what you did when you did that? Just, like getting the information going, and just like hanging out with people. It's just like hanging out with people.
I think like that's key though, because by hanging out with people and sharing those stories, like if you are getting more involved, trying to get more feedback, that's kind of great, because sometimes it isn't just about the code, it's about building those connections and building that understanding, and having that conversation and talking about it is actually kind of key. And that does bring in your community, but also raises your awareness and raises your profile as well.
But you're both quite extroverted people. Quite magnetic people who, very good at sort of like, socializing and bringing people together. What happens if you're an introvert? How do you do it then? Okay.
Reach out to your local extrovert. No, I'm kidding. No, I come across quite extroverted, and I can be quite extroverted, but it's very much a mix. Like if I'm by myself here, like the last 2 years have been showing much more of my introverted side, and I get sometimes a bit more antsy when I have to go do stuff now. It's like going from so many social interactions per week to pretty much nothing, and everything happening on a screen. Yeah, obviously that is a bit of a difference, but I think if you don't feel comfortable doing that, just surround yourself with people that you do feel comfortable with. Like start small, and it's one of the things that I started doing with Tech Camp and Meetup Mates back when I was still working for that company. Like starting a small sort of community, like surround yourself with people that you care about, people that and go do these things together. Like obviously not everybody will have like a business partner or anything like that, but if you don't feel comfortable doing it by yourself, find somebody who will be doing this with you.
That's so true, because I'm actually not really extrovert. I'm actually quite introverted. I actually push myself to do stuff like this. I don't always enjoy it, to be honest. Like I absolutely loved the Ubuntu community because they've made me feel very welcome. And actually, when I went to the first UDS, I actually sponsored myself. I knew nobody going to there, but they made me feel so welcome and involved that I actually wanted to become more involved. And I really enjoyed that. And I think the key for any EPP setting up a community is the exact same thing. Make it welcoming, foster helpfulness, foster a good experience. And if there's anybody at the very beginning making it unwelcome, boot those people out from day one.
Can I just add to that as well, like the portion of like the inclusivity, like it's so important to approach everything with kindness, and also just to be like, if you need to genuinely want to include other people, you know, like obviously nobody excludes people on purpose, but like, you know, making sure that every person who is wanting to engage with you feels the psychological safety to engage, and to make sure that they feel like they can say everything, they give you the right feedback, and like the rest of the community members is kind toward each other. That's super important. And you need to make sure that you enforce, or not only enforce, but if something goes wrong, you need to look at that, because
absolutely, yeah, great points. Yeah. So, I mean, this brings me, I guess, quite nicely onto this next question. So let's just put yourself in the position of someone who's maybe scratching an itch with a developer project, which we've heard a few times through the course of doing this series. They're scratching an itch. They've built a little project to solve a particular issue. They've put it onto GitHub. They've got some traction. They're getting some stars. A few people are starting to use it. How would you think of what do you need to do when you're thinking about creating the foundation for a successful community? What are the 2 or 3 things that you'd be thinking about doing? I mean, I know we've talked about, you know, being friendly, being welcoming, sort of getting out there and meeting people and so on, but practically, like, do they need to be thinking about like code of conducts at this point, or like the type of tooling that they need to be setting up? Like, how should they be thinking about those practical steps for setting themselves up for success?
I think having a code of conduct there the whole time from day one is always the best thing to be. If you want to be treated well, you would treat the others well. And also just having people that are involved in your project having the same kind of ethos. But I think to your point, like to get more of a awareness and more activity, start by promoting it, start by the blog, start by documentation, start by actually, you know, putting that out there, because if people are using it and also more inclined to understand it from day one, they're more interested in sharing that to the next person and also promoting that externally. You can also think about it as there's nothing stopping you ever recording a talk and publishing that online, using social media on top of that, like be it LinkedIn, Twitter, or a Twitch stream, or something that you also can improve and increase your wider reach than just your local communities and that you're able to get to. I think that's quite interesting as well. And that starts off by getting wider adoption. So if you can only talk to people, for example, in your London area, or your Paris area, your New York area, you're now able to go to a wider reach and get more interesting feedback. But also that means then you're looking outside of your pool of developers in your local community to get more interesting areas. I think then that also means your involvement in that community needs to increase. So also making it accessible to people. So again, think about it that again, if you're looking for translations, maybe that's an opportunity to increase wider adoption in that area of your project. Be it open to people going, hey, you know, I'd love help with my documentation. I'm not the best documentation people. We don't have a full documentation team right now, but perhaps we'd like to employ or support developer communities this way by getting them involved in doing documentation. I think that's a great way to foster opportunities for people who wish to be involved in open source projects that may not be a coder as well, because at the end of the day, you can have code that works brilliantly, but if you can't read the docs and if you can't understand what's actually happening, then actually you're not going to ever great increase your wider adoption.
Dominique?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I just wanted to also add, like, just make it easy for people to start, you know, like don't assume a base level understanding of something. You know, like one of the things that I found very difficult when I wanted to get going with stuff, like pretty later on in life compared to most other people, you know, sometimes you go to a documentation page or like a README or something like that, and it's like, yeah, you just do these things and you just install this stuff, and then magic happens. Like, I saw a really good talk from what's her name? I'll come to the name later. I'll see if I can find it. But it's like it's so important to make sure that your documentation or like your README in the GitHub project links to your documentation and backwards. but also making sure this is what it's supposed to be doing. These are the things that I'm expecting you to have. If you need more information about these things, this is where you can find it. Just make it easy for people who have no idea what this is supposed to be doing to start, you know? And basically what I'm saying is don't assume base level understanding of things. Like don't assume that the people that read your documentation will know exactly the same things you do. And also to Laura's point, like go to where the people are, like make sure that if you know that these people are on Medium or on Twitter or on LinkedIn or part of particular groups, go there and talk about things like, hey, would people be interested in doing these things or something like that? Yeah.
And are there any resources that exist out there that are publicly accessible? Like, for example, if you're not going to create your own, well, you might do, build your own code of conduct, for example. Like, or are there any? I mean, would you try and are there resources you go to, for example, in the Linux Foundation or the Cloud Native Computing Foundation? Do you know if there are places that you could go to try and get some of this?
There is a code of conduct. A tech code of conduct. I will find the link for you and I will share it afterwards, but there is a specific tech code of conduct that is I don't remember who it was from. Like I don't really want to spend too much time typing about it, but yeah, like that's a very easy to manage code of conduct, and on that I think it's also very important to also give people an understanding of what happens when you violate it. And you need to make sure that you have a good understanding of what you do when somebody violates it. You know, like sometimes it can be with language barriers. It's sometimes you know, using different wrong pronouns for certain people or saying something that's culturally inappropriate. Like you need to make sure that you have a system in place to make sure that if something happens like that, how are you going to broach this subject to people? And you know, if somebody's keeping on being a bad actor, they just have to go.
Well, I mean, maybe that's a good time to come onto this, Laura, because I know that I mean I've seen you deal with like sort of fallout and sometimes in communities over the years. Like, do you want to maybe give us a bit of an insight as to like what could go wrong in a community and whether you know if you and how often is it the case that you might get a bad actor within your community and how do you think about managing that?
I think, you know, it has happened in the past more often than it should have done, to be honest. I think when people use the medium of typing online, they have the weapon of the typing and you can say whatever you like and there's no consequences to it. I think when you're face to face, it's less. It's not always, it's not perfect, but it is definitely better. I think when you type things and you don't take into account there's culture at play, there's a language at play, things can be taken up entirely the wrong way. And sometimes it can be said even worse than it should say to somebody. I think that's been the hardest thing I've had to learn is that, you know, and it can take an awful lot out of you as well. I would say as a community manager or somebody who's involved in steering these communities, when you have to deal with situations like that, it can get very frustrating. It can get very depressing, to be honest, and actually can lead to burnout. So that's one of the reasons I stepped away from the Ubuntu community at the time, was just it was becoming so hard at the time. And also you're dealing with situations where actually I was still balancing my personal life, my professional life, and then I was dealing with this in my spare time. It's not always great. So I would say to places or organizations that are setting these things up is to think about that. If you're going to have somebody involved in that, think about how you can support them internally as well, because that's also very important. But to your point of like, how long should it happen and why it should happen? I think having a code of conduct at the very beginning is great, but also if something does happen, use the code of conduct, not as a weapon, not as a piece of paper, but actually say, look, you know, we want people to do better. We expect better of people. And so, you know, if you can't play by the rules, then, you know, there's other opportunities if you can go to other communities, but in this community, this is what we stand for. This is what we want to support. And being very clear on that from the very beginning, it means actually, I think people are more inclined to join your organization or join your community. And don't forget, that's going to benefit you in the long run, not just from a use case from your customer point of view, but also if you're looking from a hiring point of view as well, they'll also have a good experience because many people get hired from the community into organizations based on their experience within the community. I think that's kind of important to think about as well.
Yeah, that's some really good advice there. Just moving on a little bit, let's assume that you've created an open source project, you've started to get some traction, the community is developing around it, things are going quite well. How do you start to think about commercialism, like in relation to the community? Is it okay to sell to your community members?
Oh, this is such a tricky one. Like, I personally think at the end of the day, organizations are there to make a sale, make a business. They're there to support people by having employees and pay a salary check. And that's quite hard to balance between giving everything away for free and developers expecting every single thing from the organization at the same time. But there is a balancing act. And I definitely think at the same time, both are true and both need to be supported in the same way. And both are can benefit one another. And I'm pretty sure Dominique has a lot more experience in this with HashiCorp. So I'd love to hear from her point of view.
Well, I mean, yeah, it's an interesting one because, like, I know that there's a bunch of companies out there that have different types of business models, and companies that have gone public that have different types of business models that start from open source. But from a HashiCorp perspective, like, I need to make sure that I choose my words right here because reasons. But yeah, it's important that you obviously need to, I feel like you need to put your practitioners first, but you also need to think about early, how am I going to monetize this in the long run? If you're wanting to monetize this, how are you going to do it? Like, are there specific things that is there a particular, feature set or something like a particular group of things that you can focus on to like make it that portion something that's like enterprise or commercialized. For instance, with HashiCorp, it's very much like everybody can get started with the open source products, but there are levels of scale, and if you want to start using it like more from an auditability perspective or from a larger scale organization, like the more people need to be able to use this product, the more support and more enterprise features you may need. So like there are things that you can think of, like how can I do that? Another way is potentially offering enterprise support. So I know that there's companies doing that kind of stuff. So I think that's kind of an interesting way of looking at things. On the flip side, however, if you wait too late or wait too long, then you're going to experience stuff that happened with that one container company that I probably shouldn't say anything about because it's going to circulate on the internet, and I don't want to have people chasing me for for commentary, but yeah, like it's definitely, I've seen companies fail based on not coming up with a viable business model. So it is definitely worth thinking about from the get-go.
Yeah, I think the one thing to think about, the one final thing is like on that topic is like they are both a community. They just have different roles in your organization and in your feedback loop. They both customers and community. I use that word quite similarly between both, because at the end of the day, I look at it as a community manager. My customer are my community, and a salesperson, their customer is the people paying them at times. So they both need to be serviced, and they both provide different forms of feedback back, and they can also both talk at different levels about your engagement with them as well. So yeah. It's a balancing act, I would say. Mm-hmm. And I would say that doing it right isn't always easy, but doing it well is.
Yeah, I think from my personal experience, the times when I've seen really bad impacts of decisions on community have been when maybe the community has got a particular assumption that a company is going to do a certain thing or act a certain way, or a line is in the sand at a certain point, and then something happens that kind of changes that, or like something like, maybe a company wasn't upfront about a particular feature that maybe was planned to be in the open source, and then it went into, or it's a feature that maybe people have got used to using in the open source, and all of a sudden it turns into a proprietary feature. I think those are the times where I feel like, if you're upfront and honest and you're kind of clear as like where you want to be and where you want to go and how the community is going to work, it's fine. I feel like it's when it starts to get a little bit like kind of
the gray area.
Yeah, the gray area. That's I think that's when it starts to feel like it often has like negative impacts and consequences. So I feel like it's really important to make sure that you try and manage that as best you can and be as upfront and as clear as early as you can.
I think that's quite tricky, to be honest. I'll play devil's advocate. I think when you're a smaller organization, when you've got a small engineering team and it's been heavily driven by engineers, it's very easy to make it visible what your roadmap is. But I think as your company organization expands and you've got more stakeholders, be it like sales or marketing or product managers, or you've got actually customers now as your main stakeholder as well, what you say and promise to that one customer may actually be weighed upon other areas that aren't always visible to an organization, to a community. And that could be, how the sales are doing, how your revenue is doing, and making decisions based on, okay, we've got X amount of customers looking for this one feature. It was being given away free for the community. How are we then trying to monetize this? Well, actually, it's a better weighing it against these 5 customers against our wider, broader base. So again, those decisions aren't always going to be visible to a community member, but all they see is the expectation of like, this was here one day and now it's not, but now I have to become a paid customer. That's not a great experience. But they're probably not going to be able to say those kind of sentences to the community, but how you actually phrase it or understand it and make it, you know, still a good experience from them, going, hey, you know, okay, that is now a paid for feature. We still have freemium features, we still have other things. So still providing context as best you can, because I think as soon as you start turning your back on transparency, as soon as you stop showing people what's actually happening, you're going to lose people behind you. You're not going to have people supporting you. And I appreciate it is a very, very hard line to actually balance out. But I think it does need to be tried. I think some places are not as good as others.
Yeah, and I wanted to add on that as well. Like, absolutely, transparency is important. It's going to be hard, you know. Like, and as you said, like if all of a sudden like a certain feature, we're deciding not to put that in a paid version right now. Like, I think it would be. I personally think, you know, like you can say from a certain moment in time, like, hey, the expectation is that we want to make money out of some, you know, out of this product right now. I think it probably be maybe better to like add other things to it that maybe will go into a paid version and people will trust you more for doing the right thing. And also just talk about it like, hey, we want to do something like this, what would you do or something? You know, I'm not sure how much sales and marketing would probably like that, but like including people in these decisions might be interesting, or at least give them the idea that they have the opportunity to give feedback on it. And on the other side, if you do mess up, just own it. You know, like, hey, very sorry. You know, we've been made aware that this is, you know, not gone down well. You know, be apologetic, do something for it. Like, but don't just like go hide in a corner and mope about it. It's important to keep being honest and transparent. If you want to keep a customer base, it's important to just keep them involved throughout the whole process.
Yeah,
that's my opinion, at least.
I mean, assuming that you have a successful project and there's a company behind it, you start to make money from it. Would you say it's inevitable that, like, at some point the company's going to come across this issue, and at some point the commercial side of the business is going to win out against the community? Like, because
I don't see it as a winning out. I see it as there's still two customers to be supported. So you can still have a vibrant, thriving community. Look at the likes of Red Hat out there. It's managed to do it over the years.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, they still have two types of customers and communities. And at the end of the day, both are being serviced by using the features. Yes, at the end of the day, if people want to use more, I think there's other ways that potentially you could look at doing it. Like, I love the idea of paid support. You know, at the end of the day, that's a great way of getting engagement and still being a customer, but still utilizing the product or project for free. It's not always possible, I get it, but at the same time, it's a happy medium a little bit. And then obviously, the more vibrant and thriving your community are, the more helpful and resources of, like, when you are having an issue, you could post to many of the other products and platforms that are out there that help you with questions and answers, to get that expertise and experience. And also, I think that'll also help you from finding new developers who actually want to engage back with you, potentially bring that into their organization for their next project.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I think there's maybe sometimes, like, you know, I've seen community get maybe used in a certain way, in the fact that it's good early days to get engagement around a project and build up all this amazing brand equity and knowledge and sort of ecosystem, and then at some point the switch gets flipped and it's like, right now now it's about making money from it. And so, like, we'll take the feedback from the commercial community or the paying community over the sort of open source community, and then it starts to be the shift that you see in, you know, and it's often with companies that get a lot of investment and are on the hook for huge financial, so I think that's the tricky balance. And from your experience, like, as a community person or as a DevRel person, like, in these larger organizations, and this is genuinely, I don't know the answer to this, do you have different people that look at those two different sides of the community, as it were, the product, like, the people who are paying for the product, and the people that are contributing to the open source project? Or is it often the same, like, DevRel or community person who'll be covering both sort of communities, as it were?
At HashiCorp, it's different. There's different people servicing the different communities. So as a solutions engineer, I mostly like deal with paid customers. So I mostly deal with the enterprise side of things. But we have a whole developer advocate team, developer relations team that does everything that's like out in the wild. I usually say that. But the thing is, like the people that they reach are also the same people that I reach. I do the same activities, but from a different angle. So I will still see the same people and we still get the same message out. It's just, like at some point there's a sort of handoff between what my DevRel folks do and then on the other side where they come and say, like, hey, like I've been using your open source technologies for ages and this is great, but we now need to talk about more of the enterprise stuff, and that's where I come in. So it's kind of it's a balance. It should be it shouldn't be a fight like within the organization. It shouldn't be like, oh well, I follow I only do the open source and open source is the best, and that's fine. But like it's all, it should be in harmony, all of it, like as Laura said as well, like it's you're still servicing two communities, and it's important that everybody gets the same love and attention.
And I think the two roles are quite complementary as well at times, like between I often think like a solutions engineer is like servicing our internal customers who already paid, maybe engaging with us, maybe doing POCs for potential customers. And my job is also like our potential customers, because they're community members using us and we're trying to advocate and raising awareness. And then if I'm raising enough awareness doing my role of work with developer advocates, then eventually they will funnel back over into the solutions engineer side of things. So they do need to work together. They do need to like have an understanding. And I know that a lot of organizations, including my own, like our solutions engineers are engaging on our forums and answering those questions and taking part in writing blog posts as well. So like there's so many different ways to engage at different levels. It's important that we're all on the same page, to be honest, and all working towards the one goal, which is building out awareness or providing a solution for somebody or helping people along the way. Because I think all those three things need to happen in order to be a successful, engaging community.
I think one of the things that I think I might think about as a founder, especially if I'm creating open source software, and I might not have, let's say I've not engaged in open source software before, I create a project, it's successful, and then I might be a little bit concerned that because the code's out there, the community might like form around it. I might not be that experienced, and at some point someone will just fork it and create their own project around it. Like, is that something that I should be worried about? I mean, have you seen that happen? And if that is the case, like why would that happen? Are there any like kind of pieces of advice around how to stop that happening? And maybe in some ways it's a good thing. Did you have any aspect or opinions on that?
Imitation is the highest form of flattery, right? No, I don't know. It's a thing. It happens. I've seen it happen. I mean, I've not been seeing it happen from like a very, close perspective. I've seen it happen out there, but like it's yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure how I would mitigate that. I think it's always going to be a thing that it's a possibility, but yeah, I don't know. What do you think, Laura?
I've never seen it happen, or I'm sure it does happen, but I think again, it is a risk of you putting something out there, and especially if you're going to make it open source. But I think it's a bigger conversation to do with licensing, which that's much bigger than this type of conversation. And I'm not the right person for the licensing side of things, but I think that's where you would look at potentially going down that route or that avenue. But again, I think if you're putting something out there and people are engaging with it, that's what you actually want. Whether they fork it and go elsewhere, that's not what you want. So why are they doing that? Is it because you're not being receptive to their new ideas of providing, or you're not receptive to potentially bugs or any issues that are being filed? Like, why is that? Because to avoid that happening, potentially it's like opening up to the wider organization and saying, hey, we have this product out there. We want people to get involved and provide us with feedback. So we need to be open to that feedback. We need to actually make it available to have people to have that conversation with us. So if it's an open ticketing system, if it's filing a bug with us in terms of shooting us an email and going, hey, actually, we have a product manager inside, we have an engineer, let's jump on a call with that person and say, actually, what's the issue here? Like, help me help you be involved with this, because we value your engagement. And I think having those kind of conversations prevents hopefully the latter actually happening, and you're losing anything that you actually had built yourself. I wouldn't like to see that happening, and I don't think that happens as often as we'd like. I don't want to see it ever happening, to be honest.
One of the things that some of the people watching this might feel would be a good way of maybe trying to mitigate it would be like to donate the project to a foundation. Would you recommend that, or think about that being a good course of action? And like, what are the considerations someone should have when maybe considering a donation of their code?
I don't have enough experience in that, but I do think it'd be the right way, because some of those foundations that are set up have a lot of things that we've just discussed on this call earlier on in place to actually help you be successful and also help your project survive and thrive and get more involvement. And if you don't feel that you're in a position to help it grow, but still want to see it out there, I think that's a good outcome in the end, because then people still have that ability to use that project.
Dominique?
Yeah, no, if you've created something and it's your child and you want to make sure that people are using it and you don't know how to get yourself to the next level or something like that, and yeah, definitely, like if you go and bring it to a foundation, then you have the opportunity to see it grow, and it's still being a bit, like there's some oversight that happens that might not happen if you're just like lone wolfing it.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've talked a lot about some of the things you can do to try and create and maintain a successful community. If you're a founder working on a project, obviously your head's probably going to be quite deep in building that project, and your head's going to be in the code. How much time do you think it takes? I mean, I know it's probably a difficult question, but like practically, should someone be thinking? Because obviously we've talked about setting up like the foundations with a code of conduct, and maybe recording yourselves and doing blogs and going to this and going to meetups and so on. Like, do you feel like there's a certain amount of time that you need to put into this to make it successful, or do you think is it just a unique thing dependent on the specific project and the way that you set up as an organization? I mean, because I'd be thinking as a founder, like, oh my word, how am I gonna do all this? Like, how do you actually think about like the time that it takes to commit to this? And do you have any guidelines on how much time people should be spending to try and develop and maintain a community?
You can spend as much time and as little or as much time into it as you want. Like, depending on I'm assuming that some of these people will have day jobs. Like I'm not sure how much time you can spend on it during the day. I'm not sure if you have families to think of that you have to, like, if you want to spend all of your time to it, like you can. I don't know if it's necessary. It depends on how quick you want to get something off the ground, right? Like as soon as something is live, or I don't think it's okay. I'll formulate my thoughts here. I think it's important to make sure that for people watching, if you are, in an established family or an established job and stuff like that, and you have the idea of doing something, any time you can put towards it is enough. Or is valid. It's not just the young people or younger people without families living with their parents or something, and or like people having enough money to just like fund themselves through a project like this. Like it's important to ensure that yes, you need to put time towards it, but don't beat yourself up about it if you can't spend all of your waking moments at it.
I think as well, one thing I think potentially with some founders is there's more than one person potentially. So if there are 2 or 3 people, maybe split up the time, maybe come up with different roles, when actually your role is this, your role is that, and actually I'm going to own this from start to finish. And I think maybe that's a fair way, because at the end of the day, you're right. If it's one person doing it plus their day job plus personal life, you're going to burn out and it'll never get off for success. Whereas I think if you take a step back, and not everybody's in the position to say, actually, I'm going to take a leave of absence potentially for work. I'm going to give up my day job for the next 2 months. And this is what I'm going to dedicate. Obviously, it's not going to be 2 months, maybe a bit longer. But you know what I'm saying is like putting some dedicated time to it is not always going to be feasible for everybody. But if you've got a group of people who are involved in this process, I think divvying up the work and being clear on the expectations, being clear on what we're going to do and try and achieve. And I would actually say during that journey and during that process, being very transparent, talking about it in public, use social media, use the likes of LinkedIn. And I think by gathering people's attention and momentum, you'll get people following you and actually going, hey, I like that on your journey. Or like I saw like last week you posted that blog. I saw that you kind of stumbled upon an issue. Actually been thinking about that, and I actually provided a little bit of a solution. So now you're actually building that momentum, not giving away to it full time, but also now you're getting slowly involved with your community members. And potentially those community members could be your very early new employees or part-time employees. So I think it benefits at both. But I think if you're going to approach this process with something to achieve going forward, what is it? Are we looking to like build up something to hand it off to a foundation, build something up to raise startup capital? They're different types of conversation. I think as a founder, you may want to think about that process from the very beginning. And maybe that's a little bit too much to think about at the very beginning. I don't know. I've never founded anything. So I guess I'd look back to what people would look to do.
I think you make a really good point about like thinking about how to amplify a message. You know, like it's going to take a lot of work early days. I mean, the projects that we've created at JetStack have taken tremendous amounts of effort just to sustain and build that community. But once you get to a certain point and you've got a certain amount of users, a certain amount of like visibility, a certain amount of traction, then as you say, Laura, that momentum builds and you almost create a flywheel where it kind of starts to sustain itself. It's just I feel like you're gonna need to put a lot of time and energy into it at the beginning with the hope that then you can build that momentum that kind of almost runs itself to some extent. I mean that's what we see. I mean and it keeps growing, and once you've got a project that's embedded and it's been used and it's been relied on in production for like say a year, then more people get to find out about it. I think it's not always the case you're going to have that really hit that home run. I mean, I remember when our first engineer created Cube Lego, which is a way to automate Let's Encrypt. Went to the first KubeCon and got bought drinks all night by WeWork, Bose, whoever else it was, because they're like, "Oh, you've saved us so much time," and it was like, "Wow, I didn't really quite expect that this would happen." And so, like in that case, it was like a lucky break in some ways, and obviously credit to the engineering behind it. But I think it's really important to think about maybe those early days and like also what your goals are and thinking about where you're trying to get to, and then really have that in your mind and think about what it's going to take to get there, whether it's commercial outcomes or community outcomes. There's one question I got in the background here. It might be a good one to sort of to close with, but obviously there's a lot of events that have moved online due to the pandemic, and that's changed the way that people interact with communities as well as with events. Do you think actually a result of the pandemic and a lot of the events going online has actually helped create more inclusive events that otherwise couldn't attend in person? And how do you see the shape of community being like run and managed changing like off the back of the pandemic? Do you think it's going to be more virtual events, or do you think we're all just going to go back to doing more of these big in-person events?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I think genuinely speaking, it has opened up a wider community audience, 100%, because for people who potentially wouldn't have had the opportunity to take time off of work and go to an event, or have the ability or even could afford to attend some of those events, they're now virtual or they were online, and most of them were free at the time. You now have got access to having developers attend some of these events and learn and bring that information back to their organization, which is a bonus at my point. I think it opened up for people who potentially didn't think they were going to be confident of going to a conference and going, "Oh, this is above my ability and skill set to learn something this great, this powerful." They can now do it at their own pace, at their own time, press pause, come back to it, do a bit of research at the same time, go back to reading those documentation, reading those blog posts, and actually learn. So I think in that regard, it's been brilliant. It's been harder though as well. If it's not in your language, or if it's not accessible, if you can't follow on to either like understand the language in real time, that's been harder for people as well. So I think having those things translated or closed captioning is absolutely brilliant. And I think the big thing that I've taken away from this is people are going back to in-person events, but they still want to have those people that they've actually now captured their imagination, captured their attention being involved. And I think that needs to be kind of like done better between virtual and hybrid coming together down the line, because I do think we still need to service and look after those developers and those community members who've been part of our community for the last 2 years. We don't want to just drop them, forget about them. We still want them to be involved. And I think conferences are going to have to work very hard to keep that going forward.
Dominique?
Yeah, no, Laura's absolutely right. I feel like the last 2 years definitely opened up a whole slew of possibilities when it comes to like being like it's easier to attend things. There's one thing I want to know, that like Zoom fatigue is a thing, like there's that everybody is going to be stuck to their screens for the whole, like literally almost all day. And ultimately I do think that humans are social animals, that even though not everybody is is as introverted or extroverted. I do feel like we need the human interaction in person, because that is nothing that will make the difference there. However, I do agree with Laura. You do need to make sure that there is both a good online presence. The experience needs to be adding value to the people that you have, like you have in your community. And yeah, like conferences will have, for DevOps Days, for instance, we're organizing DevOps Days London. We are doing a hybrid version this time. And we're at the moment, we're really thinking about how are we going to make sure that the people that are sitting at home don't feel FOMO about not being there. But on the other hand, how we're going to make sure that the people who actually attend feel like they have like a full programming. How we need to make it attractive to both people at home and people in person. And I think also, like, throughout the last couple of years, that some of these conferences have not always figured out how to best present a full day conference. Like, you can't just like lift and shift it to everything online. There are some things that you need to consider for people, like how are you going to make sure that people stay engaged like a whole day watching a screen, or how are you going to make sure people feel included or engaged with other people? Like, are you going to have like a Slack channel or something on the side? I mean, I'm very specific on like organizing events right now, but like I think ultimately, I think there will be a place for both, and I think it's important to have a place for both. It's just ultimately you need to ensure that everybody in your community is included.
Great point to finish on. Thank you so much, Dominique and Laura, for joining us. Keep track of what's going on with the next Founders Forum training event at the Open UK social media, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram. And hopefully I'll see you both at the next Open UK or some various open source meetup in London. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for joining, everybody.